Hello, thanks for joining me this morning. For American viewers, thanks to any replay viewers. It's nighttime for me, but there's still some things we can mutually experience and talk about. Some of those things are COVID-19, the need for mutual aid societies to help those most seriously afflicted by the economic damage of a pandemic and the necessary shutdown measures, and also what needs to be done in the face of severe rampant Trump failures and the fact that a foreign adversarial nation helped install this particular president. So let's see, what have I got for you today? A new ad put out by the Rule of Law Republicans. Hi, Paul, thanks for joining in today. Hope you're doing all right. And hope everybody's doing okay. And here's the ad.
Worries about a pandemic at this point?
No, we're not at all.
How concerned are you?
Well, we pretty much shut it down. You know, a lot of people think that goes away in April.
We have contained this, I won't say airtight, but pretty close to airtight.
It'll be down to close to zero. It's going to disappear. It's like a miracle. It will disappear. They're going to have vaccines, I think, relatively soon.
I would say to Americans who are concerned that you're not taking this seriously enough.
That's CNN, fake news.
The president say, for example, he's going to continue with political rallies. Is this sending the right message?
Going to a rally, there's no reason that you shouldn't go.
It's really working out.
The president stopped shaking hands.
In our line of work, you shake hands.
No, I don't take responsibility at all, but it's something that we have tremendous control of.
How would you rate your response to this crisis?
I'd rate it a 10. This is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic.
Are there worries about a pandemic at this point?
No.
So that was the ad that I was referencing. Paul saying he has some good news, good and perplexing. Okay, so good news is always good, I think, even if it's perplexing, because our knowledge can always expand on any given topic. So whilst you're preparing to share your news with me, Paul, I'd like to just discuss with some people what I think is a really important public health message to communicate. And that is that young people can get this disease, and young people are also on respirators and ventilators. And that our contribution to keeping our country safe and our community safe can't be underestimated, because a lot of the transmission load is created by asymptomatic or mild cases. Oh no, Paul, I'm just waiting for your message. You tell me anytime you're ready. I'm not saying wait for me to discuss something, because I'll keep talking and then keep an eye out for you typing as well. So feel free to share with me your perspective, people, as well, on what's happening. I know there must be lots of on the ground reporting about what's happening, because doctors and nurses have been trying to write collective letters from their unions, etc. So I'm going to go back and share a little bit more of Twitter, just because it's important to see sometimes the faces of people who are young. So this is a young man who founded an organization called Above the Law. He must be a good guy, because there's a lot of people in the comments section, high profile people who work for good, wishing him well and a speedy recovery. But he's on a ventilator and in a critical condition at present. So evidently a lawyer who perhaps runs a website writing about the law. But look at all of these people. So the virus matters, but the host response matters at least as much, and probably more. Cytokine storm. So yes, the immune system response to the virus can be damaging. But lots of people sending that guy love. Oh, but yeah, something more important than that is doctors and nurses sharing pleas for medical care. So let's look at this important point, because US doctors and nurses and hospitals have sent a letter to Trump begging him to use the 1950 Defense Production Act. So Trump has resisted that. Alternatively, he's alternated between insisting that he's already done it and that he'll only do it if absolutely necessary. But the bottom line is he hasn't activated it. So let's have a look. Maybe we can have a look at the letter itself. A quote from it says, immediately use the Defense Production Act, DPA, to increase the domestic production of medical supplies and equipment so that hospitals, health systems, physicians, nurses, and all frontline providers so desperately need have concerns that there are dwindling supplies of N95 respirators, N95 masks, and maybe the word mask is missing, N95 masks, respirators, isolation gowns, isolation masks, surgical masks, eye protection, intensive care unit equipment, and diagnostic testing. Even with an infusion of supplies from the strategic stockpile and other federal resources, there will not be enough medical supplies, including ventilators, to respond to the projected COVID-19 outbreak. We have heard of healthcare providers reusing masks or resorting to makeshift alternatives for masks. So using the Defense Production Act would mean Trump directing companies to produce supplies that meet hospital demand based on pandemic modeling. It would also give manufacturers confidence that there would be a market for massive numbers of supplies that they are commanded to produce. So far, Trump, like someone who's potentially beholden to the Kremlin, has said companies are doing enough voluntarily. So the letter is a big rebuke of that Trump statement. And yes, here Heidi explains that DPA is the 1950 Defense Production Act, which requires companies to produce orders deemed necessary for national defense. And it also allows POTUS to designate materials to be prohibited from hoarding or price gouging. So if you see footage of people taking and buying all of the toilet paper in a shop and loading it onto the back of a truck and then screaming, "Go Trump," you should know that Trump has the power to activate the DPA, 1950 DPA Act, and designate materials to be prohibited from hoarding or price gouging, so that people could once again safely wipe their butts without trying to use materials that are unsuitable for introduction into a sanitary sewage system. So America is soon going to incur huge plumbing costs, not just in an individual's house, but in you will have overflows of sewage in your streets because there will be blockages, something called fatbergs, when congealed fat washed down, kitchen sinks, and excrement and unflushable wipes, which haven't broken apart or dissolved in contact with water like toilet paper does, and have congealed together to make huge pipe blocking lumps, or fatbergs as they're known, which then cost thousands of dollars to dig up the pipes, locate the blockage, and send people in with shovels to dig apart these congealed fat, flushable wipe, kitchen towel, wipe lumps that have emerged because people have flushed inappropriate stuff down the sewer. People should know anyway that wipes that claim to be flushable are an example of false advertising, and they are not flushable. So how can we create public pressure on Trump to activate the Defense Production Act? Well, it's a gamble. We can just try in the hope that outrage is broad enough, because if it's just people on the left who complain about something, those voices are invisible to Trump because he does not rule for the whole of America. So outrage that exists outside of his political base means nothing to him. If his political base starts to catch outrage from the rest of us, then Trump may potentially take action on any given topic. So yes, we try and expend our outrage judiciously so that we are including as many people as we can and building that consensus that can potentially prompt Trump to take action. He is not inherently drawn to actions and outcomes that benefit the American public and safeguard the American public. So that's just something important I wanted to share with you. Let's see if we have a link to the actual letter itself or if it's just being reported on. No, I don't have a link to the letter, just those quotes. So perhaps Heidi has seen the letter itself, but she doesn't link to it. Okay. We have more warnings from experts that epidemiologists are warning that Florida's slowness in closing beaches created a situation in which spring break partiers spread the virus all over the country. So when you have a virus at epidemic levels and pandemic levels, and it's spread so broadly throughout various communities, you have a situation where hospital systems are overwhelmed, where you may have one ventilator per 50 people requiring one. And can you imagine the type of decisions that healthcare workers have to make when you have one ventilator and potentially 50 people requiring a ventilator? So everything rules you out in that instance. If you're over 40, if you have any type of pre-existing condition, you don't get the medical treatment you need to save your life, and you potentially perish from lack of oxygen and from this illness, which people are often led to be in a false sense of security about, that it's only deaths from people with pre-existing conditions or the elderly, but yet younger people are dying, and younger people are needing ventilation, younger people are needing extracorporeal oxygen assistance. So, well, all right, we don't need that. Let's have a look. Let's catch up with the comments section. Somebody's calling me a virus. Oh, wow, Paul's news is that he doesn't have cancer. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. You have autoimmune pneumonia. That's fantastic news, Paul, and I'm so happy for you, and I'm glad to share. Actually, I don't need to share that broadly, but hooray. State governments are doing way better than federal governments. Dave is drunk. We don't really need you to share that information with us, Dave. 50 nurses were exposed to coronavirus at St. Mary's Hospital on Saturday. Someone says, you're such a happy and nice person. Instead of spreading negativity, don't stop blaming the president. It will be a cold winter in hell before I stop holding the president of the United States to account for his criminality and his bad faith actions and his jeopardizing the health and safety of not only millions of Americans, but of millions of people around the world. Because leaders in other governments have looked to Trump and taken note of his dismissal of the severity of the virus and of the potential pandemic as it unfolded. So Trump has cost countless lives, and Trump's arrogance and commitment to destruction and chaos and propensity for bald-faced lies over and over again, and a very fascist method of trying to exploit people's worst impulses, trying to exploit people's tendencies to look for a source outside of their community for a problem. And when I say outside of their community, I mean outside of their nation. So rather than the self-reflection of saying, oh, yep, there were some intelligence failures around 9/11. Trump has failed to order respirators and protective equipment, and he disbanded the pandemic response unit in 2018. Instead of holding the government accountable for any of those actions, whether it be Bush or Trump, and instead giving a white man incredible benefit of the doubt, being overly generous with white benefit of the doubt, and yet having a systemic blindness, a systemic failure to give President Obama credit for overseeing an extraordinary economic recovery following the crash that followed the end of George W. Bush's presidency. So white blindness to the economic recovery and the positive response to the stimulus measures organized by Barack Obama have led for people, too many people, to sit passively by as a good man's efforts were disparaged and an unqualified criminal, long criminal history man with a false persona of business success that belied the truth of his multiple bankruptcies and his $1 billion of indebtedness and his association with criminal mafia groups and money laundering for criminal activities such as drug dealing, sex trafficking, human trafficking. Trump's involvement with that much criminality and the ability of too many Americans to just respect the vote of those who looked at a criminal and said, he looks out for the little guy. Now, it's a myth that it was poor people who voted for Trump. Trump's basis was and is still comprised of primarily middle class or wealthy Americans without a college degree. Trump voters are attached to a philosophy that's born of resentment, grievance, and the overly high expectations of Americans who conflate success with material success. And we have to reframe success because a lot of the previous structure of defining success has gone out of some types of American society. But at the same time, it's not as if religious evangelical Christians have shown that they have a better definition of success. They're still dying of whiteness. There's a book published literally called Dying of Whiteness, which is about states, red states, where a critical mass of people have voted for politicians who have undermined medical programs, have undermined Medicaid expansion, have rejected federal aid, where people have lost an average of 3 to 4 weeks off their lives when you look at the collective statistics from states that accepted Medicaid expansion programs from the federal government. And why are they being induced to vote for people who take from them, who take from their infrastructure, who have consequently higher rates of high school dropout and suicide, who have gun policies that are associated with vastly elevated rates of white people killing themselves using guns that are available in their home that they were able to obtain because of Republicans taking NRA money and foisting overly lax gun legislation on their counties, on their communities, on their states. So we'll probably block the guy who calls me a virus. Riot Women's here. I'm such a fan of yours. Thank you for joining in. Loretta's asking me if her life is not as worth as much as mine. I'm totally not saying that. I'm saying that the pandemic is causing hospital systems to be overwhelmed past a static line of critical care facilities. So if we have a flat line for available beds in an intensive care unit, and yet the pandemic surges abruptly because no governmental protective measures are enforced, then a lot of the cases exceed the level of critical capacity in hospitals. The number of available beds is exceeded, and as in Italy, physicians are being forced into the untenable and awful and psychologically damaging position of having to choose whom to treat with a ventilator. So Italian doctors are telling you they've had to make these tragic decisions of excluding people from care because the number of available beds has been far exceeded by numbers of cases of people with severe cases of COVID-19. So no, people who are 60 don't have lives that are less valuable, but the disease is so overwhelming that when it hits and there are no protective measures in place and the peak of cases is so high and not enough work has been done to flatten the curve and at least spread out the infections or slow the rate of disease transmission out. So the curve of cases is flattened out and the peak is less high, then the peak is smaller in terms of exceeding your static level of intensive care unit beds and respirators available and ventilators available. So Trump could do more to help hospitals increase their number of beds and ventilators. Trump could actually activate the DPA of 1950, the Defense Protection Act. And you all have to ask him to do that, because if enough people in red states begin to demand that he activate the DPA, then he will, because he doesn't want to lose the red states. He doesn't want to lose his base. Fascists don't rule for the benefit of their country. They rule to please and to validate the feelings of their vocal base, because they always have system workarounds, because by definition, an authoritarian is an unprincipled person who seeks to gain power and privilege. And that is Donald Trump. And his base have allowed him to do that. His base of supporters, who are primarily middle class to wealthy white people with a sense of grievance, who literally, when speaking to a researcher, a sociologist and psychiatrist called Jonathan Metzl, who published Dying of Whiteness, they literally told him that they were afraid that in minority school district areas that public funds were being used to buy party buses and have parties. So these are people who vote against school funding in their state because they're so afraid that people of color are abusing the public funding that they get for schools. So they're so irrational that they would rather deprive everybody of access to quality schooling than challenge their own beliefs that they've been inculcated with, presumably on Fox and Breitbart, that people of color are abusing the system. Stereotypes promoted since Reagan, such as a welfare queen, are being sold to Fox viewers who become like shells of their former self. And people whose elderly relatives have retired and started watching a lot of Fox have reported that their relatives have become hateful, unlovable, irrational creatures who are full of hate rhetoric against others, irrational grievance, feeling hard done by. Now, a man called Radio Free Tom was talking about how he speaks to his old friends who have come from an impoverished background, as he has, and they say things to him like, well, you've got to love like Trump because he sticks up for the little guy. And one factor in common is that they feel that they've been screwed over by the establishment. And if you actually ask them what they have in their lives, they have cars, homes, parents with access to medical care, and all of the trappings of success, but they don't count it as success. It's not enough for them, and they've been fed a philosophy of resentment. And that feeding and that amplifying and cultivation of those feelings of grievance and resentment have poisoned Republican voters' minds. So other people who are immune to that poisoning and who don't center Fox News as part of their information diet are not afflicted in the same way by that mental poison. That's my friend, Twitty. Hello. So good to see you. Yes, I do think Trump is fixing to benefit from the chaos induced by a pandemic. I have been entertaining concerns for a significant time that he, or at least his staff, perhaps Stephen Miller, purposefully seeded the virus around the US, because we already know of the whistleblower story from the Department of Health and Human Services that DHHS staff were sent to Travis Air Base and other air bases with inadequate protective gear and inadequate training to greet Americans that had just been repatriated from Wuhan and hand over keys and accommodation keys and arrangements, but to be in close contact. And that as they did that, they could see CDC staff members standing around in hazmat suits, and they were uneasy. But the whistleblower was punished, told not to speak out, and was demeaned as being hysterical and not a team player. So those DHHS workers also traveled around the country after their assignment to Travis Air Base, and they interacted with migrants as well. That was my concern, that Stephen Miller, if not Trump himself, were deliberately initiating actions to promote the spread of the disease. Now I'm going to look it up because Alex Azar investigates whistleblower, EHHS. All right, so I'll get that up for you. That's a CBS News article that I can share. I'll remove this one and share the new article so that people can see the same headline that I see. Let's have a look. So this is CBS News. Alex Azar says he's personally overseeing an investigation into HH whistleblower allegations on coronavirus. Well, at the moment my screen's frozen. Oh, under frozen a little bit now. There's another article called Physicians and Bioethicists on a Pressing Question, Who Lives and Who Dies? But I'll tell you straight away that Italian physicians report there's been age cutoffs that have been instituted. And if you've got two 40-year-olds and you've got one who's healthy, but one who's got two children, then you just have to kind of keep making this up as you go along. But whichever way you choose, it's awful. So Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar, and don't forget this is a man responsible for organizing a deal for Jeffrey Epstein so that he was allowed out of prison on day release for multiple days each week and would go to his office and return to a luxurious private prison at nighttime to sleep in a private prison wing. And he was able to meet with girls and have sexual intercourse with girls at his office during the daytime. I mean, that wasn't specified in his deal, but Alex Azar was still someone who helped organize the deal, the terms of the deal, i.e. the day release. And the 18-month, this relatively short sentence, and using only the oldest victim of Jeffrey Epstein, who had made a complaint to police, as the only plaintiff featuring in the prosecution. So let's have a look. Azar told Face the Nation, said, "We are aggressively looking." Oh yeah, they're looking. They're keen to get to the bottom of this to see whether there is validity to the concerns. What the American people need to know is that we have now passed well over 14 days since any HHS employee had contact with the individuals concerned. Nobody is symptomatic. Nobody has the disease. That's as good a time as any for me to introduce the fact that you can be asymptomatic, and the A at the beginning of symptomatic means without. You can be asymptomatic, have no symptoms, and still transmit the virus. So let's have a look now and just go asymptomatic COVID-19 bulk of transmission. Because I know I've read articles about this, which I can share with you. All right, a publication called Asymptomatic Carriers of COVID-19 Make It Tough. All right, I'll quickly work a little bit through Alex Azar, though. So they say they take the protection of its workers very seriously. He's lying to say there was no spreading of the disease from this because you don't know. Even though it's not medically indicated, we have offered to test HHS employees involved. So they haven't insisted on testing the employees involved. They've just offered it. And Alex Azar is asserting that because they are asymptomatic, they can't be carrying the disease, even though we know now that a lot of the disease transmission occurs through asymptomatic carriers. All right, so I hope that's convinced everybody that I'm not lying about the fact that a whistleblower pointed out that agency employees who helped quarantine American evacuees from Wuhan, China, lacked proper training and protective gear. He also denied any possible exposure to the coronavirus led to its spread on the West Coast. The whistleblower filed a complaint with the Office of Special Counsel, alleging the agency sent more than a dozen workers, more than 12 people, to receive American evacuees from Wuhan. And he warned that the staff may have been exposed to the deadly virus since they hadn't been trained in using protective equipment and had face-to-face contact with evacuees. According to the complaint, the workers didn't show symptoms indicating they were infected, and they weren't tested for coronavirus. So they were exposed to evacuees, they had inadequate training and inadequate gear, and they weren't offered, or they were perhaps offered testing, but they weren't compulsorily tested. So Travis Air Base was one of the locations for helping the evacuees. That's in California. There are others that we've looked up sometimes, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Okay, what I'm now going to do is share with you all the article that I think is critical for the public to know, that asymptomatic carriers are responsible for a significant amount of transmission, which is why very broad testing is recommended, even of asymptomatic people, so you can isolate all of these stealth carriers, people who are inadvertently spreading the disease, but they display no symptoms or very mild symptoms. So here we go. This is infection control today. Asymptomatic carriers of COVID-19 make it tough to target. Published on the 17th of March. The rate of transmission seems to be what makes COVID-19 a more serious threat than an earlier iteration of a coronavirus outbreak. Yep, it's detectable in or on aerosols for up to 3 hours. What are aerosols in that setting? Don't know. Just in the air? Cardboard for up to 24 hours, and plastic and stainless steel for up to 2 to 3 days. Copper is the best. We want everything made of copper at the moment, but we don't have everything made of copper. So SARS was stopped by intensive contact tracing and case isolation measures. But in contrast to SARS, most secondary cases of SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID-19, appear to be occurring in community settings rather than healthcare settings. However, healthcare settings are also vulnerable to the introduction and spread of SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, and the stability of COVID-19 in aerosols and on surfaces likely contributes to the transmission of the virus in healthcare settings. These findings mirror those from 2 other recent studies by Dutch and Japanese investigators that also point to the problem of asymptomatic carriers of COVID-19. Japanese researchers looked at the 634 passengers who tested positive for COVID-19 on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. They found that 17.9% of these passengers were asymptomatic. Dutch researchers estimate that the proportion of pre-symptomatic transmission was 48% for Singapore and 62% for Tianjin, China. So I hope that emphasizes to people that it's really important to promote testing, to demand testing from governments, or to be facilitated by, Tucker Carlson is now telling Burr to resign. That's handy. Zinte says they're really afraid that people of color will reach their mythical level of success. Mythical, according to who I am, I think I could benefit from more explanation from what you said there. Somebody, Bernie supporter, troll, bot, algorithm person, whatever they are, is calling Biden the liberal version of Trump, which is so far removed from reality that that person should be just blocked out of hand for being a chaos-spreading propaganda person. Twitty is coming back slowly, which is good. It's very emotionally overwhelming to engage with politics at the moment. I understand that. I am grateful for people who can pay attention to what I say, which is often quite hardcore and not uplifting. I try and add some smiles to add to the uplift, but it's challenging information and it takes its toll on me as well. So Zinte is saying monetary and social success. Yes, so some people are very resistant to the idea of Black people having monetary or social success. And it's because we didn't necessarily know this, but a lot of people are still very attached to an internalized racial hierarchy in their own minds. And it hurts to have your worldview challenged. So to the Maslow's hierarchy of need, where you have food and shelter and love, we add worldview validation as a big plank to it, because people are putting so much energy and effort into trying to preserve a reality that validates what they've been taught to explain the world. People need their worldviews to maintain a degree of coherence and consistency. And to fight disruption to those worldviews, people have voted against their own self-interests, have voted for Trump, and continue to vote for Republicans who strip their states of funding for public amenities and public infrastructure that benefit everybody, regardless of wealth or impoverishment. Public roads, public libraries, airport towers, bridges, public hospitals, etc. Corporation owners benefit from having people with enough money to spend. So economists often forget about demand being a very potent and powerful factor in economics. You need people with money to have consumer power, which is 70% of the engine of commercial activity and of the economy. Oh, we don't have enough moderators to block the troll? Surely, Zinte, you might be a moderator. Can we block the troll? I don't need trolls today. I'm sorry that David's not feeling well and is coughing. Lungs, long-time smoker, blood. So could be bad things. Thank you, Zinte. You're on it. Awesome. All right. I have another article I wish to share, and then I should go to bed. Share screen. Oh, okay, maybe 2 more articles to share. This was quite scary. This is a woman. It's scary because, yes, to maintain a coherent internal worldview, I too had difficulty processing that young people can also, young people without pre-existing underlying healthcare conditions can still die. It is challenging to deal with, but this young woman was 39. Well, 39 years old. Her name was Natasha Ott, O-T-T. She felt the beginning of a cold coming on March the 10th. She had only a slight fever. The medical clinic where she worked had only 5 tests for the new strain of coronavirus. She passed it on because she was told she was low risk for the disease, so she didn't want to use up a test. But by Thursday, she felt something in her lungs, and on Friday, her partner found her dead in her kitchen. So to me, it's important to look at the youth of that face and say, we are seeing victims like that from the coronavirus. Her test results weren't confirmed, but she was ruled negative for the flu. So it's to be presumed that that's what she had. And that's really important to take note of. This story is being published in the NOLA.com, which is the New Orleans Advocate. If you want to Google it yourself so that you can see for yourself what I'm talking about. Yes, I think Mar-a-Lago got perhaps shut down because of a number of cases associated with Mar-a-Lago. Zinte's got to get back to driving. Thanks for being here, Zinte. Dave Munro's cat, yes, go see your doctor. That is important if you have blood that you're coughing up. That is very important. Thank you for prompting that, Paul. I can't load the new comments, which is a little bit frustrating, but I'm sure we'll fix it in a minute. Nope, still can't load the new comments. Rats. Oh, well, I don't know if I'm still broadcasting even anymore, but I will still make an effort to share the very last article that I wanted to share. Social distancing. Why fighting the coronavirus depends on you. I think we watched this the other week. Oh, dang it. Still loading. Oh, look, now I'm getting ads for something called Feeding America. Together we can fill their fridge. That's good. That sounds like pre-existing charity infrastructure. That's why I put... Okay. Oh, sorry about that. I realized that was me accidentally making that video stop and start. Maybe I can check it out again now. Dave says, it's going to be okay. You're 44, 44, a few more years to go. It could have been Radiolab. Dave Munro's cat. It's not a good idea to dismiss coughing up blood from your lungs. And we can't take it for granted that we'll stay alive for a few more years when we're 44, because healthy people are dying still. So, yes. All right. Here we go. This might be Radiolab, but it's been designed by, here we go. This is the most important thing that you can take away. All symptoms: fever, cough, fatigue. %, mild. Oops. Okay, I'm just going to pause this transmission to say, David, either you make a commitment to seeking medical treatment for your evident issues, or we just mute you as a way to discourage us being passive facilitators of your undertreated medical problems. Okay, so I'm not prepared to sit here and read comments anymore about how you're not going to seek medical treatment and you're coughing up blood and you're just going to take more whiskey. I'll ask my moderators to block you unless you say something fairly rapidly about how you intend to seek medical care and make some kind of honest commitment to that. Okay, whether that be telemedicine, which is more appropriate in the climate of a pandemic. But if you are cavalier about this, I'm not going to be, a passive bystander that just enables you to continue to publicly report your philosophy of not seeking medical care and dismissing coughing up blood. Okay, so that's just how it's going to work with this. I will ask the moderators to mute you or boot you unless you say something more indicative of an appropriate resolve to not end your own life via the mechanism of willful medical neglect. That's all. Now we resume this. Oh, you can't hear it. Oh, so sorry. Okay. My goodness. I've been watching that for like 5 minutes. Okay. I'm so sorry. This is like, I've been sitting here very pompously just watching this, and you haven't been able to hear any of it. Thank you for letting me know.
It may seem drastic, but it's worked before. In 1918, the cities of Philadelphia and St. Louis were both hit by a flu pandemic, but they responded in different ways. In Philadelphia, health officials allowed a huge parade to go ahead, while in St. Louis, officials prepared. They closed schools, theaters, and bars.
Now you can hear?
Philadelphia's hospitals were overwhelmed, and many more died as a result. But St. Louis was able to avoid those excessive deaths. 100 years later, these are the two scenarios we face. A difference not in whether you get the coronavirus, but when you get it. That could mean the difference between life and death, maybe for someone you know. But we have to act now.
It's such a good and important video. I'm going to share the link to the article that has that video embedded in it, because I now realize you guys didn't have audio for a lot of it. Nope, that's not going to work unless I press cancel here. Okay. Social distancing, what are the rules? We can probably guess that the rules are stay home as much as you can and avoid going out unless it's absolutely essential, such as to a medical appointment, etc. So if you want to just find that article, you could just Google Vox coronavirus flattened curve, and that'll take you to that article, and that video that we were just watching is embedded in that article. Now, hello. Thanks for joining in. My earnest wish every day is for more people to appoint themselves, to deputize themselves to be an information spreader. So to counter the virality of Donald Trump and to counter the virality of COVID-19 and the virality of a fascist tendency to miscalculate the risk, the relative risk posed to our nations from fundamentalist terrorism, and overlook and increase our exposure to problems such as mass deaths from pandemics and overwhelmed hospital systems and exposed healthcare workers who have inadequate supplies of protective gear and inadequate supplies of respirators and ventilators and things needed to not only keep people alive, but to allow healthcare workers to not get infected themselves and to not be able to do their job without being vectors of mass spreading the disease themselves. So that's my message every day is please to anybody watching, deputize yourself and step up your confidence level because the times call for it. My favorite movie for a moment like this is Angry Birds, the first movie. And if you haven't seen it and you don't understand, you should know that there's an angry bird and he's rejected by his community because he's just too angry. But he's the only one who doesn't feel compelled to be nice to an invading tribe of pigs who appear to be nice but secretly steal all the children of the birds, steal all the eggs in order to eat them. And then they look to the angry bird for leadership because he was the only one with the ability to look past the nice overtures and be cranky at people who couldn't adequately explain what they wanted or why they were there and whose motivations seemed suspicious. So thank you, Paul. I'm sure you do share all information as much as possible. So it is our moment. It is a moment of anybody with a tendency to be intense or anxious or worst case scenario person, because we are in that worst case scenario with a compromised Russian asset in the White House and a team of complicit criminal enablers surrounding him in positions of extreme power, such as Mitch McConnell as leader of the Senate. And a significant section, between 40 to 50% of the American public, who don't have access to accurate information because they are conditioned to seek news only from comfortable news sources such as Fox that validate their pre-existing worldviews that are predicated on an inbuilt system of racism, racial discrimination, of a social hierarchy that affords them greater privilege and greater prestige because they are white, that they think whiteness and Christianity built America, and they have been taught to overlook the contribution of migrants, and they have been taught to overlook and to minimize the contribution of people of color. So that's what we're fighting against, and they're pretty significant obstacles. But we don't shrink from obstacles, we rise to challenges. And we try not to stagnate in defeatism or despondency. They're big obstacles. But yes, there's less air pollution over Los Angeles at the moment. There's a dolphin in, which river was it? There was a dolphin in a river where there's normally no dolphins. And I don't want to say there's an upside to millions of people likely to die around the world. But there is an opportunity to confront some of the problems we have. A lot of the passive enabling of science rejection, that's got to go. We have to acknowledge that scientists were right about COVID-19, and it was the facile optimists who said, no, everything's fine. Trump's right, there's nothing to worry about, who have led us down this dark path of inadequately resourced healthcare workers who are now at risk, who are dealing with people who have succumbed to a virus that could have been mitigated against, that could have been contained if there had been prompt action earlier. I think the screen keeps freezing. In any case, I'm going to bed. Good night, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other. And let's talk more on another occasion about starting up mutual aid societies in communities where we live, because the economic depression that's likely to result from all of the measures that have to be taken to stop even more millions of people dying from this virus are going to be devastating and impoverishing and thrust many people into life and death situations as well. Thank you for your time and attention. And if you have any abilities that you think you could coordinate with me to help address the crisis, if you have an ability to design logos, if you are creative, if you're good with lettering, we need slogans that say things like flatten the curve, save hospitals, or stay home, save hospital systems. We need badges, we need designs. If you're good with words, if you're good at writing a letter to the local paper, if you have a good ability to hold a pen and write on a piece of paper and take a photograph of yourself, even just your hands holding a piece of paper, to just attach some realness and some authenticity to the various pleas we have to put out there. Please urge Donald Trump to activate the DPA, the Defense Production Act, and force manufacturers to start manufacturing masks and ventilators and respirators. So we can't stop false facts, but we need to help crowd them out. And that's the strategy that's been used against the truth, is the noise strategy. Just crowd out real information with appealing and often reiterated lies. So we are counteracting that, not by trying to stop lies, because we can't. We have no ability to put a hand over the mouth of liars, and protesting things that we can't immediately stop is, well, we need the serenity prayer for that. Grant me the ability to ignore what I cannot change, and the courage to change, the courage to tackle the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Something like that. Grant me the serenity, etc. So Americans probably know that saying better than I do. But Kevin says he has family in the hospitals working. It's really bad. Our hospital system is going to collapse. I completely agree with you. And my only suggestion at this point is to just try and get people on board as much as we can. Everybody get a pen and write one of those messages. You know, when people start all sharing a message, get a texter. That's right. Trump. Activate the DPA, Defense Protection Act. Protection Act. Now, manufacture masks, gowns, ventilators. Okay, do one of these. Do one of these. If you're American, it's your country and you're asking your president. So yes, personal protective gear is so necessary right now, because infected medical personnel are going to be even more powerful vectors of spreading the disease to people who need to go to the hospital for any reason. So your help is urgently needed. Do your own equivalent of this. Create consensus, create public pressure. Trump does things when his base is on board. And the time has come to put aside bewailing and gnashing our teeth and wringing our hands. We need to keep doing effective things to build consensus. And these have been used before to good effect. Just human people, whether your face is in it or not. Everybody showing your authentic selves in a plea that becomes united. It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfection is the enemy of the good and the enemy of getting things done. We need things to be done. And yes, there's a criminal with an aversion to doing things in the White House, but public pressure is a gamble that we have to take. At the same time as we help out hospitals by sewing masks if we're crafty at home. But in the meantime, federal government has a huge power to get things done. And that 1950 DPA Act would allow Trump to make provisions against price gouging of hand sanitizers and toilet paper. You need it. Yes, 50 nurses at Paul's Hospital have been exposed. There'll be not enough people to man the healthcare system. If you're having a baby and you need a hospital admission, you'll be screwed. If you have a child and your child cuts their head open and needs stitches, you'll be screwed if there are not adequate doctors and nurses at hospitals or beds to see your child or your relative or your mother or your father or your cousin or your aunt. People will die, and they will be people we love. Do it. Don't ignore me. I'm going to get off now. Go get a pen and a piece of paper. If you can't tweet it out from your account, send it by direct message to a journalist who does tweet things out. Yasha Ali, I don't know, somebody find a journalist on Twitter. Google the word journalist in the search bar on Twitter and find people who will collect and transmit those messages. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Take care of yourselves. The virus in Australia sucks and has a terrible trajectory. I'm not there at the moment, but the Prime Minister's giving out mixed signals. He's increasing suppression measures, but at the same time, he's refusing to close schools, and it's all ridiculous. And they're also running out of personal protective devices soon, protective equipment as well soon too. So not as bad as the US, but approaching it. Give it a week or two. Hi, Timothy. Nice to see you. Timothy, do one of these as well. We have to get people demanding that Trump activate the Defense Protection Act. He keeps claiming he has, and he hasn't. We need the might of the American federal government to help doctors and nurses get the protection they need, not only for their own safety, but to protect their patients and their communities. Thank you. Why is the person who said no to me telling me what to do? What did you say no to, Tinkerbell? Doesn't matter. Tinkerbell's not responding in a timely fashion. Irrelevant to me. I'm going to bed. Thank you so much for being there with me, watching that video from Vox about why it's so important that asymptomatic people get tested as well. In South Korea, in Italian towns where they've done that, it's proven to be very effective. So there needs to be more tests. There needs to be enough reagents to take the tests, enough nylon swabs to conduct the tests. There needs to be a lot of things, and there needs to be a concerted effort by the federal government. And we have to force Trump to pay attention to what needs to be done. And I don't really trust Dr. Anthony Fauci anymore either, because he lied about what Italy had done in order to make Trump look good. They lied and said Italy hadn't closed their borders. Sorry, he lied and said Italy hadn't closed their borders to make Trump look better for having closed its borders to China. And that made me go, wow. Dr. Fauci is one of them. He's prepared to lie for them in order to keep his position at the podium. And presumably he's rationalizing that it's for the best, but it's not okay, because when you sell out your credibility like that, then people can't take the rest of what you say seriously. Somebody says, sleep well. Thank you. We'll try. Alan says, thumbs up. Kevin says, love you all. Good message of solidarity. Timothy says, fingers crossed. Take care, everybody. Paul needs to find out if he has to take action, but we're very happy for you that you don't have lung cancer, Paul. And take care. All the best, everyone. End broadcast.